know, that's a card that I've held to my chest until more recently. More or less because I'm at war with many plagiarists who have deviated, every one of them, from solution. 2-3 years ago we had online debates in the op-ed forums with Ellen Hodgson Brown, for instance, where she denies interest is even the problem. Bill Still's original Money Masters video was all these advocates of interest. Who are they to claim that there's going to be inevitable failure? He uses the exact quotes from my work in that video. And why is it, especially since I was here first, all in 1983 and 4, more or less as a whistleblowing type of effort, I published all of the material that I had provided the Reagan administration, complete even with my computer models, complete even with source code, fully documented, you see. And you have actually been able to download. This was posted to academic bulletin boards at a number of universities and other public bulletin boards that people would cross. Monetary reform places. Early on, the idea of mathematically perfected economy traced, of course, from those, postings to, forums such as the Longways Forum at the University of Colorado. And I didn't introduce the idea. A fellow originally posted it. Huge debate ensued, where all these egotistical, quote-unquote economists, started calling me a Marxist or a socialist or a communist or whatever, which, the only thing that mathematically perfected economy is about is actual true free enterprise. You're either an advocate of it or not, and there's only one fact of true free enterprise, and it's certainly not. It certainly involves no exploitation whatsoever. Much less could it involve an ever unjustified means of exploitation, which has never even been subjected to public affirmation in any ostensibly representative process. Much less would it be a process which has never even been declared to the subject people, can only multiply artificial indebtedness into terminal indebtedness. And anyway, to finish up with, this woman is, so I explained, the nature of the failure is that it deprives industry of enough free circulation, which can be dedicated to sustaining industry, that the industry is compromised, can no longer afford to service the terminal sum of debt. And thus, this exceeding our creditworthiness deprives us of further legitimate means of abiding by the rules of the system and maintaining a vital circulation by borrowing further. Thus, the circulation inherently deflates after the moment of inevitable failure, and exacerbates the failure under the very conditions we not only see now, but which we see are addressed by all these methods of artificial sustention. The Reagan administration, for instance, I thought I was never going to hear anything from them. We had a number of discussions during the campaign and soon after he was elected. I knew people high up in his administration were looking at my work, studying it carefully even, and it had engendered rifts within the Reagan campaign. And about 1982, they called me again. I thought I wasn't going to hear from them. They were careful never to say that they presented any of this to the president himself. But actually, I can hardly imagine that that wasn't the case, because I do know that it generated risks at the highest levels of his administration. The kind of thing that it would be preposterous that the president never even heard about this proposition of mathematically perfected economy, and thesis of potential inevitable failure, which I even argued at the elevated rates of prime rates that we were suffering at the time could occur probably at the soonest toward the end of his first term in office, but quite possibly the system could have failed in his second term. Quite probably, I should have said, because persistence in those elevated rates of interest, only multiply the debt all the faster. Anyway, when I finished all this thesis of inevitable failure with this banker woman, she says, so what's the solution? And so I explain mathematically perfected economy is an eradication of interest. It's basically a restoration of the right of the individual to issue their own promissory obligations, free of extrinsic manipulation, exploitation, or deprivation of the right to make good on them. And this is done through a common monetary foundry, and the only other thing that really mathematically perfected economy is an obligatory schedule of payment, because this, in conjunction with eradication of interest, is the only thing that makes it mathematically possible to solve inflation, deflation, a further thing which I call maldisposition, which maldisposition is a dedication of every unit of circulation toward servicing debt versus sustaining industry and commerce. In other words, in this first categoric fault that I give, inflation, deflation, and maldisposition, that is circulatory inflation as opposed to price inflation. Circulatory inflation, circulatory deflation, and circulatory maldisposition. The only solution of those things is not just to maintain a volume of circulation, which is perpetually consistent with the volume of wealth that must be represented, but the circulation must likewise be fully disposable to that purpose too, or that proportion is in fact actually nullified. In any case, so I explain this, and she says, well, how do we get there from here? And I says, well, it's very simple. You refinance all debt, counting, and this is just not. I tend when I hear my many plagiarists, I tend to be like as much as slammed up the side of the head with a sledgehammer from the very beginning. How none of these people conclusively qualify, anything that they say. And I want to get at this money as debt thing, or this ostensibly, debt-free circulation thing. So what I'm saying here is that this isn't just a simple idea that we have to refinance all debt under mathematically perfected economy, counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal. This is actually a product. This idea is actually a product of going through all of the ramifications of the obfuscation of the promissory note and determining exactly how, as much as is practical, excuse me again, we can rectify the crimes which have been committed against us. After all, it's certainly a crime against us when we are not only denied free enterprise, but an obfuscation of our own promissory obligations is imposed upon us, which can only multiply artificial indebtedness, which doesn't even exist to banks, which never, when they create this money, ever give up like lawful consideration, which could therefore comprise such an actual debt. The debts are not even owed to the banks, I argue, in other words. And there's a proof of this as well. There's a proof also in all of this of one and one only suitable vehicle for monetizing and representing and preserving the nature of the currency which represents, and all this then being a process of monetizing the production of the people. So anyway, I finished this brief explanation with this woman, and she, next thing you know, 20 minutes have gone by in what was just going to be an introduction. We've covered every aspect of the subject that I was never even to bring up. And she's encouraging all this. And when I finish, her jaw is dropped, and she says, "Do you know, I always assumed things amounted to what you have just so perfectly explained. I'm astonished," she says. "Do you know, this is what everyone in the world needs to understand immediately?" So I actually find that many bankers, from the highest level to the lowest levels, understand these things, at least on some intuitive level. I also note in their behavior of those who are most opposed to solution, which in fact eliminates them from the picture, that they are most defensive of the actual facts which most expose the crime. And this also, as I interpret it, is evidence of some level and degree of understanding these issues. I will also say, in regard to this intercourse with the Reagan administration, that the very fact they were careful not to mention that the president had received this information, although in the end I do get what is actually a silly, preposterous form letter from Reagan himself with imitation signature on it. At least as best as I can tell, it's an imitation. But it's an explicit letter referring to what I had presented. But instead of referring to this as a proposition of mathematically perfected economy and proof of inevitable failure, as I had presented it to them, those were the very titles that I used. He just thanks me for, quote, my ideas, unquote. So here again, I interpret that this is a guilty party, knowing they were wrong, never having a single argument which they dared raise that might somehow poke a tiny hole in anything that I had presented. All this is by mathematic proofs. I mean, there's a reason this debt, that money cannot be a debt is not a fact at all.
But do you think it's more of short-termism and thinking, okay, I might. I mean, one, it's quite, sometimes it's really important to present a message in a way which most people can understand without being a mathematician. But do you feel that it's more short-termism rather than long-termism? Well, I recognize there's a problem, but hey, I'm not going to be around for that problem to actually become a real issue.
Well,
let's put that off a little bit longer.
That's quite possible. Excuse me again. In fact, people who might want to be kind to Reagan in retrospect, might just tend.
No excuses, but do you think that's
right?
the
But
thing?
they might tend emotionally to take that very course in interpreting the events which ensue, because, as I was saying